Welcome everybody to the 36th seminar of the International Interdisciplinary PhD in Progress seminar series, Phase 3, organised by the Global South Network. I'd like to start the session by thanking the organiser of this weekly seminar series, Dr. Nauman Riayat, lecturer in law, Leicester Law School, and who's the founder and convener of this Global South Network. I am Shalini Sharma. I teach history at the University of Keele. My research interests combine my multidisciplinary background of colonial, post-colonial studies, politics, and international history. Since my monograph, Radical Politics in Colonial Punjab, Governance and Sedition, and a subsequent project on public history in India, I've been looking at the lessons of liberation and republican citizenship that Indians and Americans have exchanged and learnt from each other in the latter half of the 20th century. Dr. Amit Singh is the discussant for today's session. Amit is a postdoctoral researcher at the Centre of Social Studies, University of Coimbra, Portugal. He holds a PhD in human rights from the same university. His research interests include right-wing politics in India, religious populism and emotion, Hindu nationalism, secularism, human rights, and religious minorities. His most recent article is Secularism in the Troubled Waters of Hindu Nationalism, a case study of the conflict between freedom of expression and religion in India. It was published this year in Secular Studies. His latest book is An Approach to Hindutva in India, published this year as well. Amit is a SILF Fellow at the Tokyo Foundation for Policy Research in Japan, and he's also the holder of a Slovakian national scholarship. And I think he's speaking from Bratislava today. And he's also a research associate at the Centre for the Study of the Indian Languages Society in India. He regularly writes opinion articles and appears in public debates. Rupavardhini Balakrishnan is the peer commentator for today's session. Previously, she was an auditor for the Government of India for several years. She then pursued an LLM from Harvard on a Fulbright Fellowship, and she's currently in her last year of her Doctor of Philosophy studies at the Faculty of Law at the University of Oxford. Her research interests are in constitutional law. She also teaches at the University of Oxford. Last but not least, our guest speaker for today's session is Saloni Pradhan. Saloni is a PhD candidate at the School of Politics and International Relations at the University of Leicester, and she's a very active member of the Global South Network. Her PhD investigates Hindutva nationalism. Saloni will present her project entitled Hindutva Nationalism and Political Socialization, a Study of Indian Youth. So, Saloni, you have up to 35 minutes for the presentation. I'll probably interrupt you if you're still talking when you have, just to tell you that you've got 2 minutes to go, if that's okay. After the presentation, we'll have about 5 to 7 minutes from Amit, and we'll also have time for questions from the audience, as well as questions and comments from the peer commentator, Rupavardhini. So I'll let you begin now. Saloni, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Shalini, Amit, and Rupavardhini, all of you. My PhD is titled Hindutva Nationalism and Political Socialization, a study of youth in India. This is a tentative topic because I just finished my first year, and this basically outlines what my research questions are like. And I'll begin by presenting the key concepts, the research questions, and then moving on to the objectives, the sort of gaps that I'm trying to work with, the methodology, and my upcoming fieldwork that's planned in India in October. So we can begin with Hindutva nationalism. And historically, as I'm sure you're aware, Hindutva nationalism came up in around the 19th, 20th century, coined by V.D. Savarkar, a Hindutva nationalist leader. It first came around as a sort of anti-missionaries, anti-British, anti-colonial ideology, and then slowly sort of moved on into a cultural nationalism, sort of ethno-religious movement. And it basically says that Indian identity is rooted in Hindu religion, and it evolved into a movement, into a political ideology through the BJP, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. And first it came up in contemporary Indian politics around the 80s, when it was politicized and went on, it became a major political issue with the BJP in 1992 when the Babri Masjid happened, and then with Advani's Rath Yatra, and then moving on slowly to the Godhra riots. It saw an upsurge at that time, and then it went down again until 2014. And 2014 is when Narendra Modi was elected as Prime Minister of the country. And with that, while it wasn't a very huge election topic in 2014 itself, it slowly became a bigger issue moving on. The Ayodhya Ram Temple issue was one of the central promises that the BJP government made. And this Ayodhya Ram Temple was basically a mosque that was built during the Mughal Empire. And it was broken down with claims of a temple being there below the surface of the mosque, and that it was first destroyed and then the Mughals built over it. And recently, the court moved in favor of the Ayodhya Ram Temple. It was inaugurated in January 2024. And so we know that Hindutva is a very major issue still in Indian politics. However much we have issues such as unemployment, we have issues such as poverty, during elections, a lot of polarization happens in the name of Hindutva. So my research focus is trying to understand how this ideological shift impacts the Indian youth. And I have chosen to go with educational institutions where this will happen. And I'll explain what political socialization is. Political socialization simply is the process through which people orient themselves as citizens of a state. So how Indian youth learn to become Indian through their own families, the way they're brought up, through their schooling, through media, through, say, religious organizations or any other organizations that operate on a ground level. And there are a lot of socializing agents that have been described over time. These include state institutions, religious institutions, family, media, peer networks also. And in this case, I am focusing on educational institutions, and I will be moving on and conducting my fieldwork in 2 Indian universities, to look at these three research questions. The first one is, how does exposure to Hindutva nationalist ideologies and emotional appeals affect identity formation amongst youth in India? This is the main research question that I'm looking at. And then within it is, how do variations in, say, familial influences, socioeconomic backgrounds, caste, region, linguistics, etc., factor into the receptivity to the ideology? And thirdly is a repeat of the first one, but it just specifies that I'm trying to look at the intersectionality of these sociocultural identities and how do these influence the receptivity to political ideology. Now, the objectives of my research mainly inquire into, I'll contextualize how I came to it, is that several studies have looked into this before. Hindutva is a very widely studied subject. And there are a lot of studies looking at how it plays a major role in elections, how it influences electoral behavior. I've learned through my research that educational institutions have become major socializing grounds wherein people come at a very young age, 18, fresh out of their homes. They're put into an educational institutions where there is student politics, where they have peers. They're met with a lot of different ideas. They're met with a lot of different ideologies. And at this point, they have to negotiate with themselves to figure out what their identity within that is. And this is the sort of negotiation that I want to look at. What I will be doing is conducting qualitative interviews, 30 in all, to look at these lived experiences. I'm trying to see how these youth internalize and respond to these narratives that they're met with. And I know when I was in college, it was easy enough to say I'm a liberal or I'm a centrist, and I'm apolitical, for example. I don't want to deal with it. Why is that? What about the educational institution? What about your peer networks? What about your families have led you to make such a decision, if you have, or if you are still making a decision? Do educational institutions and these socializing agents play a role in reinforcing any of these ideologies, or do they encourage you to dissent? Do they encourage any sort of critical thinking about these ideologies? And where do they eventually lead you? And I'm hoping that my research would contribute to a larger understanding of how political ideologies are disseminated and how they affect political identity of youth in India. Because given that they're one of the largest voting bloc, the youth in India, I'm sure this has implications on electoral behavior and such as well. So, as I said, the research gap, Hindutva nationalism is a very well-studied subject. People have covered the histories, how it came up, and they've contextualized it in the Indian case. They have compared it with nationalism in other countries. And we know a lot about it. But what I am interested in looking at is when people are met with these ideologies, when they see it every day, when they see it disseminated through media, when they see it during election years, it is peddled on the streets as well. How are they reacting? Do they internalize it, if at all they do? And within it, how do their other identities either clash or sort of intersect with political ideology? And political socialization itself is a very well-researched topic, especially in the global north. And the frameworks that came about in the 50s and 60s were based a lot on what the global north saw in their own politics. An interesting study was conducted about democratic socialization in the global north, and in the global south. And it was a quantitative study, a survey that just simply found that Indian children and Indian adolescents are not as well socialized into a democracy. Now, I do not uh, understand how that would just give you an answer about how the socialization happens. I feel like there is a need to contextualize political socialization in India, uh, have a proper framework, which a lot of people have worked on in the last decade as well, and look at how the socialization happens, uh, how the ideology, like how does an ideology like Hindutva nationalism affect this sort of socialization? What sort of political behaviors and what sort of orientation is attached to such an ideology? So my study is attempting to explore how youth sort of negotiate their identities in response to a political ideology. And I also do consider the role of educational institutions, being that they are a site of intellectual discourse and critical thinking. And I do know that conducting interviews in two universities does not give me a lot of space to generalize, and that is not what I intend to do, but I'm hoping to collect enough data to at least understand how educational institutions function as a socializing agent, especially when it comes to certain political ideologies and agendas. And this is me explaining why educational institutions. Again, as I said before, the educational spaces in India are highly politicized. They A significant focus of my research is educational institutions because of one logistics. This sort of helps me conduct my research in an easier manner. But then again, universities in India have historically been spaces for dissent, debate, and political engagement. And we've seen this in a lot of studies already conducted, quite a few on Jawaharlal Nehru University. And in recent years, though, we have seen a growing influence of political ideologies within Hindutva. Not just in recent years, it's been happening. And there are a lot of student organizations and student political parties in universities that are active campaigners for the ideology. And we have also seen in recent times that there have been educational reforms by the ruling party that have in turn affected how educational institutions function. This could be funding, this could be the rationalization of syllabus that they have performed. And these reforms as well have been instrumental in why I've chosen educational institutions. Revising textbooks and such to sort of create a narrative, a sort of manipulate narrative. Many scholars have pointed out the dangers of revisionism, and that is also something that I intend to look at. How do these changes, if they do, affect youth who have freshly come into these universities? And the intersectionality of identities, as in how do factors like caste, gender, and region interact with political ideologies, is the second central part of my research. As we know, caste is quite a critical part of identity in India. How much ever we would like to think uh, we have grown. When you see an election, you know that caste is a very, very politically contentious issue. And so is region, as we know in the south. Uh, I should also mention that I've chosen one university in the north of India, one in the south. I am not at liberty to reveal the universities' names because of ethical considerations that I have. Uh, but this also affects in the way how resources to these universities are distributed, what sort of makeup these university has, what sort of what do you call diversity this university might have. Now, this intersectionality also shapes how students engage with Hindutva narratives, and I I cannot make a statement saying that, okay, maybe upper caste might be more receptive and might maybe a person belonging to another caste might not. But there is a difference in this receptivity as we have seen in earlier research, and this is what I want to look at. I want to look at their lived experiences. I want to look at how they think about it, how within this educational space and having just come out of their homes, as in with family being a socializing agent, they have come out from one socializing agent and been dropped into another. How within this are they attempting to figure out what they think is right, what they think is their political identity, what do they consider themselves as, how do they identify in such a politically contentious environment that it is right now. Uh, I'm moving on to methodology, which I've mentioned in between. I'm, of course, using qualitative methods and sorry about that. I'm using in-depth interviews as the primary data collection method, and I've chosen two universities, one in the north of India in a highly polarized state, and one in the south of India. Uh, and again, I cannot reveal the names, but for ethical considerations. But this study will be done in UGC affiliated universities to make sure that I get at least a diverse representation of students. I do not have a strict screening process, but I am trying to have students from different backgrounds, let's say. And I am collaborating with certain gatekeepers at these universities in order to advertise. I'm in touch with the student unions at these universities in order to get the word out and to better understand what the student population in these universities is like, what sort of receptivity would there be. Now, each interview would probably be around usually 2.5 hours. And the point is to explore the participants' political experiences, what their perceived identities might be, and what their engagement is with Hindutva as a political ideology. And by focusing on students, I want to also look at what, I mean, there has been a lot of research done on student politics at these places, but what the effect of this is on how they sort of negotiate with their identities. And again, I have certain limitations and ethical considerations dealing with students. They're not exactly considered vulnerable, but this is a sensitive topic in India, and the universities I've chosen as well. It is you need to be a little bit careful on how to figure this all out. And my data analysis, I'll come to it after I outline the limitations and ethical considerations. Some of the worries that are there with it is again self-reported data bias, and of course I will have a positionality statement to sort of mitigate any such a bias. There is, of course, that I'm dealing with issues such as caste, I'm dealing with ethnicity, I'm dealing with linguistic barriers. It could lead to a confirmation bias where someone would like to give me socially desirable responses. And this is something that the University Ethics Committee also brought up. People might not want to talk to me if they consider me being from a higher caste than themselves. But this is, again, this is something that my ethics approval has come back with. But we are working on that with my supervisory team at this point to figure out all these kinks in it. And then again, participants might have a limited recall or understanding of the concepts that I'm trying to deal with. Because, for example, if I just say, okay, how did your political socialization happen? This is not something a layman could simply answer. So I think that sort of boils down to my ability as an interviewer to help them articulate their points, and especially given that the topics are a little bit sensitive and they may cause reticence in the participants. And I do understand that there are limitations with the number of people. There are limitations because I do not have a strict screening process. But keeping all that in mind, I am currently in the process of planning all this out. The aim is to begin my the aim was to begin my fieldwork on the 1st of October. And even though I have ethical approval, there's other things in logistics that are a little slow, but we are getting there. So hopefully by the 15th of October, I should have begun my fieldwork. And other than that, as I said, the data analysis method in previous slide is a thematic analysis, which I hope to get to in January next year. And my fieldwork should take about 3 months or so. And once that's done, I will, I might or might not update my data analysis, but this is something I'm still sort of figuring out. So I would welcome any suggestions or any changes if you all have any. And while I'm saying this, I would also welcome any suggestions you have about conducting fieldwork in India, as quite a few of you have, I think. And especially dealing with sensitive topics like religious nationalism and universities and young students in India. And finally, the expected contributions of this research, as I mentioned earlier, is I only hope to sort of gain a broader understanding of how Hindutva nationalism is shaping uh, youth, the next generation of Indian voters, as we call it, one of the largest voting blocs. How is this changing their perceived identities? How is it helping them negotiate these perceived identities, if it is in any way? And are they, the way they react to it, why they react to it in the way that they do? And my study hopefully will shed light on how youth in educational institutions are socialized into certain narratives, and how these narratives interact with their other social identities. And I also hope to understand the role of educational institutions as a critical site for political socialization, as well as how they are sites for critical thinking and intellectual discourse alongside. And hopefully, my findings will be able to contribute to a very growing body of work in Hindutva nationalism that's already being done. So that's about my presentation. Hopefully I haven't crossed any time limit.
No, it's perfect. You're well within, so thank you. Lots of time for discussion. That's great. So can I now invite Amit, please, if you could give some thoughts and possibly questions?
Yeah. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, especially your topic very relevant and challenging, because I have gone through recent experience in India, especially in Varanasi. So there are some couple of comments actually. First, what kind of a definition for Hindutva you are going to adopt? Because when we use Hindu nationalism and Hindutva, we use sometimes this word interchangeably. So you have to be careful. And I understand you start with Savarkar's idea of Hindutva, what he want to say, but later you might include what did Golwalkar say, and also what was the Supreme Court decision in 1995, because that was the little bit benign approach towards Hindutva, which equated Hindutva to Hinduism. And then you move towards a critical stance. Then you can possibly explain what Jaffarlik believe, and you can use the other definition of Hindutva, like muscular nationalism, Sikta Banerjee has called, and communal fascism by Amartya Sen, and crypto fascism by Salman Rushdie, and Katrina Kinwell has called Alexis nationalism. there are various approaches to Hindutva. So it's very important to define Hindutva. So you need to spend a significant amount of writing on your first chapter. And also, I would like to add here, uh, when you approach to the students, you need to understand what mean of Hindutva to students. What do they understand actually? Because Hindutva means different thing for different people. For some people, it could be a way of life. So the first thing to define Hindutva, and also, yeah, towards the youth. So when you write your questionnaire, you explain, you need to give them some background, like what Hindutva is, this is what it is, but what do you think? Give them some options actually. So it would be easier. Otherwise, sometimes people have a very vague notion. They confuse Hindutva with Indianness, and something like Hindutva India become one. And your question too, actually, you wrote that how does exposure to Hindutva ideology and emotional appeal shape to identities of Indian youth? So I would like to say here how you are going to investigate role of emotion, and which emotion specifically you are talking about. It's rage or resentment or anger or hatred or pride. So you are actually, your research is moving towards emotional populism. And if you use here the idea of ontological insecurity approach, it can explain better these things actually. But what I'm saying, it would be a totally different another part of your research, and it also occupy, I just say, a large part of your research actually. So you need to, you can think about it. You need to pinpoint which emotions you are talking about. Possibly it could be resentment, or maybe hatred or pride, because Hindutva has different color. It has different camouflage also. Sometimes it's very prideful, but sometimes it's full of anger. So, and here also you can talk about some authors which work, those who are working on emotion, like Mazaruki. He mentioned how emotions are being used in nationalism, especially the idea of restoration and battle. Restoration, in the sense, means restoration of the old mythical Hindu glorious state against battle against the evil influence of the foreign culture, Islamic culture, Christian culture. So you can develop this nuance in the theoretical part of your research. And another thing I wanted to know, because you are conducting this these interview and this research after this election 2024, but I would be interesting to know if you compare what these youth used to think in 2019, because their state of mind would have been different. But after the election, there has been scandals, NEET examination scandal, unemployment, and other issues which possibly made some youth to change their ideas towards Hindutva. So it would be interesting to see from that angle. And also, among those people, I don't know how you are interviewing, like individual interview or group interview, but you need to also add another angle, resistance against Hindutva. Because when I was conducting my field work, I find there were, because when we are conducting literature review, we may not find many things in the book, because something coming from the ground instantly. So I realized there is a resistance against Hindutva, against ideology, against patriarchy. So you need to, maybe you can frame some question and look for another research question, which, what are the resistance, what kind of resistance these youth are developing? Because that's how the election result of this national election result came actually. Because BJP, I rather say Hindutva is on decline rather than going up. It also represents youth are changing the mind. It means there is a resistance in Dalits, marginalized women, civil society. So you need to find out who are these people and how this resistance from the ground shaping to the political narrative and moving toward the socialization actually. I mean, this is just an idea. So resistance, I possibly would be extra add to your research. And yeah, another thing about your conceptual framework, I rather suggest Hindutva has a direct conflict with Indian secularism. We need to understand Indian secularism is different from Western secularism. So I basically used Rajiv Bhargava's idea of contextual secularism. So you might add thinking about how this particular, because India is still a state where religion and state, we try to maintain some distance, uh, but as the Supreme Court said, because of this decision in 1995, the the lines between state and religion is blurred. So you need to see how this ideology basically pushed by the government in the institutions, and how secularism has been failed to prevent these ideology to reach people, to spread, to hijacking the institution. So I think it would be another point if you would like to add to your research. And you asked something, yeah. Sure.
Amit, just one more minute, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So field experience can be very challenging, because when I was conducting research, I was warned by some professor that I cannot complete my PhD without their help. I conducted my interview basically Banaras Hindu University. So it was so you have to be very careful. So, but of course you can find a different way to interview, but just be careful, because these are very challenging time in India to conduct this research. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Saloni, do you want to come back to any of those points?
Yes, no, they're actually really helpful points, and I have taken resistance or dissent into consideration. My questionnaire schedule has a lot of questions dealing with how they understand Hindutva, because as you did mention the 1995 Supreme Court decision, and they described it as a way of life, Hindutva being a way of life. And it is quite true that some people do consider it so. So I'm trying to look at both the sides, if their assent, their dissent, whether they deal with emotions like rage, pride, any sort of grievance against the ideology, any what all. So I haven't zeroed down on any emotion, because this isn't something I can decide from the get-go and then work with. This is something I think I need to figure out once the data has been collected. And again, thank you for the recommendations. I have consulted some, including Sarah and people who deal with emotions in politics, especially politics of ethno-nationalism. And yeah, and thanks for the warning as well. I have received this from a lot of people, especially going into universities and dealing with their administration has not been the easiest, which is why I have to take measures as in to keep the university names confidential. And, there are quite a lot of measures I'm having to take in order to mitigate any sort of risk to me as an individual researcher, especially who's traveling alone and doing these interviews alone as well. But after dealing with the people of the Students' Union and these universities, I feel like there are a lot of diverse opinions about Hindutva, and I think the data that I will collect will be quite rich, regardless if I find someone who's resistant to the idea or who's very happy with it and wants to go ahead with it. So,
thank you, Saloni. Okay, so before I ask Rupavardhini to come in, can I throw it out to everyone else? Are there any questions that or comments that you want to raise? Anybody? Abhijit.
Hi.
Hi.
Lovely to hear. Great presentation. Very interesting research, of course, given the timings. Great inputs by Amit. So I work generally, I am from India. I work in Department of Law with Noman, thankfully. And my research is on generally indigenous people, Adivasis in India. So I'll try to play a devil's advocate here just to give you an idea, because nobody is liking the government anymore. But the thing is, the previous governments in India did not do a lot in the name of decoloniality as such since independence, which has been picked up and for everybody knows, exaggerated to a very extreme pole by the current government, unfortunately, because it was not picked up by the then centrist government. So it would be beneficial for you to pick it up perhaps in your research and then criticize it, even if you want to criticize it or support it, if you want to support it. but this is something, because decoloniality is something that is appreciated as a research process everywhere else in the world in a colonial space, like in a post-colonial era. Just that when it is happening in India, and because it is being done by the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is a complete right-wing party, it has taken a completely different form, a completely different shape than what it should have taken ideally. So that is something that I hope that you cover in your research, because it will be important to look at from that perspective. Other thing, I did my fieldwork in India, okay, and I did it by living with the tribes in different parts of India. You will have to identify the gatekeepers, otherwise people will not talk to you. That's the problem. People are unaware and mostly badly exposed to the research discussions. They might talk to you if you are a journalist, but they will be hesitant in talking to you on how you are going to represent them and how you're going to represent their data. So give them a confidence that what are going to be your data privacy policies and everything, and then you'll be fine. Thankfully, you are staying in the cities. Hopefully, you're not traveling outside the city, so don't worry about that. Yeah, so don't worry about that. I'm sure you are well protected there, and but it's a really good topic, really timely topic. I wish you best of luck.
Thank you, Abhijit. Before you come back to that, Saloni, let's hear from Bernardo.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just congratulations on your research. I thought it was really well developed. I arrived 5 minutes late, so I don't know which stage of a research is. But Professor Rona is my supervisor, and I'm approaching my third year. So my concern, this is not a question per se, but a concern is that you're dealing with a lot, both in terms of in the field work and then the analysis. So from a standpoint of a almost third year PhD student, it seems very ambitious. Obviously, this you have to talk with your supervisors, but I would definitely suggest you to talk with them and see if you can scale it down a little bit, because again, from an outsider's perspective, it seems too much for the short time that you'll have. It's just a comment, but you know, this is me being a PhD student worried about deadlines, but that's me. Sorry.
No, that's a great point. Saloni, these are things that you can think about. Let's hear from Rupavardhini, and then I'll give you some time to come back. Yeah.
Thanks, Shalini.
Yeah.
Great. Saloni, firstly, congratulations. This is such a timely and important topic, but also very challenging. And I imagine scoping it out must not have been easy, but it looks really good. So well done on that. So just some general comments and some questions. I want to start by sort of pressing you a little on that, getting the definition of Hindutva right, as Amit pointed out. That's going to be really important just for your own framing. I'm not going to go into the detail too much, but there is something to what Abhijit said, right? The narrative of decoloniality that is really prominent, as he rightly pointed out. And that is probably weighing quite heavily on the current discourse that the demography you're looking at is going to be exposed to. And secondly, how Hindutva has operated recently is also through the co-option of the legacy of the freedom movement and leaders who have never traditionally been considered as part of the Hindutva ideology, the corpus, but now have been co-opted. And the result is that, so some of that aura, of course, rubs off. And also this conflation between idea of nationalism, nation, and patriotism is very prevalent. And so the age group you're looking at is probably not engaged in depth at an sort of like a theoretical or intellectual level through reading, but it's mostly going to be through consumption from mass media, social media. So that is something to look at. Are they conflating it with patriotism? Is that affecting how they view Hindutva or Hindu nationalism as part of their identity? And what is their social media presence, membership? Are they part of any groups where such discussions take place? Are probably going to be important. And then, which brings me to the next point about the type of institution. It's great that you've chosen one in north and one in south. And there's also going to be probably a little bit of difference if it is a purely STEM institution, like the discourse in the IITs is probably going to be different from a university like JNU, Jadavpur, which have a tradition of engaging with the social sciences and humanities. So that is something to account for, whether that discourse is taking place both inside and outside the classroom, or largely outside. And also to do with the type of institution is, does it allow for the student wings of political parties? Do they have a prominent presence? Because my law school didn't allow that. And that's going to make a lot of difference, right? And it could also be linked to status. And that's, again, an age group point in life where they're very vulnerable to status signaling. So does membership of some of these political organizations, the student wings, have an impact on their status within the educational institution? And as you pointed out, the leadership of the institution also has a role to do with which ideological section that you identify with, and are you likely to get better treatment, better status inside the institution? So that's just something to probably keep in mind. And I think in general, I had some reading recommendations for, it's great that you're looking at intersectional ideologies, identities. And so on caste and Hindu nationalism, I read this book a few years ago, and it's called Why I Could Not Be Hindu by Bhavar Mehkachan. And so that was a great read. And scholars like Ratna Kapoor have written on the intersection between feminism and gender and Hindu nationalism. And of course, probably looked at it. Paul Brass's work is always quite foundational to understanding Hindu nationalism and political mobilization in India. And finally, I also, just generally some tips. You've already done that, but familiarizing with tools like NVivo might be helpful, just keeping track of your research and then data analysis. And also something I was curious about is how would you account for the pre-university exposure to political institutions? By that I mean, so we know the RSS has branches which deal with every sphere of life, right? So are they from a background where parents were perhaps members, or they grew up in a locality where, say, the RSS was very active in the social and cultural life of the place, and did they have exposure in an organized manner to Hindu nationalism or not, is perhaps also going to matter, in addition to identities per se. But otherwise, it looks really great. And I look forward to reading more of your research and the book when it comes out finally. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rupavardhini. I'm going to use my privilege as chair to ask a few questions. I mean, you've actually covered quite a few of my questions, because I was quite interested in the in the different sort of disciplines, and you know, although you said that you're not going to screen people, some choices, are you going to be talking about decoloniality with a historian or a scientist or a science student, those sorts of things. But another issue, I mean, it's a very ambitious project. And I think that, although you said you're only doing 30 is quite a lot. And as you say, you're going to get some very rich data. And I was wondering about what you said about positionality. How are you going to surmount those issues of people maybe not wanting to engage about caste, about difficult subjects, performing for you in a sense, and because I don't think that's just going to be sorted out by a positionality statement, right? But also I was wondering, whether you might consider, or whether you're going to do a more of a semi-structured interview where you're not extracting information, from your respondents, but you're able to sort of let them give, as you said, their understandings of, for example, pre-university exposure, engagement with politics as well, and that would be, I mean, that would extend, that would give you more material, but it might sort of, it might give you more of a headache in that it might be hard to sort of compare and use these tools like NVivo, etc. So yeah, and those sorts of I'm also interested. I would be interested to read how you surmounted the ethical challenges that you posed yourself, but I don't expect you to answer that now because you haven't done the research yet. So you've got a bit of time to come back. Yeah. Thanks.
No, actually, because the timing for the fieldwork is nearing, so I have had to come up with a lot of things very quickly. And one of that was get anonymous written responses as a follow-up to the interviews. So if someone's not comfortable with talking to me at that time, or if they have any thoughts that they were unable to articulate at that point, then they can bring it up at a later point and just send it to me. So open forum, they can just write what they want. And other than that, the other, so I'm sorry, what was the other ethical issue that you mentioned?
Positionality.
The positionality.
Yeah.
So positionality statement is just to ensure that when in the end this does come out, then there isn't any bias on my end, and I and the people reading it are aware of my stance on the whole thing. It is not meant really to sort of mitigate any sort of risk at this point, because it really can't. And this is some sort of a risk that you can't really mitigate, but it can be considered data itself if someone is, it's very reticent to talk about a certain aspect. So I'm of the school that believes that, this can't be considered confirmation bias. This itself is some sort of data that I can use further. So that's what I'm going with at this point. But we will see how that turns out once I look in data collection, actually.
And Rupavardhini's point about STEM, and different sorts of institutions and students. So these are universities that have a lot of different schools, and I have approached different departments and different students from different departments. So the Students' Union usually has reps from different departments as well. So I'm hoping that because I have done this, I'll get people from different places, and I do not want to add another variable into my study to look at how maybe people from engineering background react.
because I do have, as Bernardo mentioned, I do have a lot of variables that I'm working with at this point. And even with the decoloniality thing, it is yet another different question. And I do understand that it is an issue, especially given the government's ICAS, the Indian knowledge systems approach that they're using in schools and universities. And but at this point, it isn't a very major part of my study because I want to not pull myself into too many different directions. So at a later point, if I have some sort of data that I can work with, and if it is a recurring issue amongst the students, then this is something I can look into, but not at this immediate point. But it is actually a very what you call important issue to look at, as even Abhijit mentioned. And I'm writing a article for ECPR dealing with academic freedom and the changes that they're trying to do right now. So that's a wholly different thing. I'm trying to keep the two things separate at the moment. So, see.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really, really exciting work and really excellent commentary and discussion as well.
Look after yourself. Have a great day. See you later.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.